Good day, everyone. My name is Matt Pfeiffer. Welcome to Conversations on Retail. It is a beautiful day in Bentonville, Arkansas. We are so excited that Suzy Monford, founder and CEO of Food Sport International, is back to continue her series focused on people, planet, and profit, retailing's triple bottom line. And Suzy's guest today is Mark Baum, Chief Collaboration and Commercial Officer for FMI. And they'll be kicking off that conversation in just a couple of minutes, but just a few housekeeping issues as we get started. First of all, I want to thank our friends at Westrock Coffee who have been so gracious in their sponsorship of this series. Great coffee. If you've not tried it, great organization. Secondly, we want to remind everyone that this is intended to be a conversation and not a presentation. So if you've got questions, if you've got comments, you've got insight to offer, we hope that you will participate actively in this conversation. And you can do that by clicking on the Q&A button in Zoom and submitting those questions and comments in writing. And then Suzy will be asking those as time allows. We asked that just so that this is probably less relevant to this particular group, but just being in compliance with federal antitrust laws, we're going to refrain from talking about anything related to price, margin, discount, suppliers, timing, price changes, marketing, product plans, or anything else that is competitively sensitive. And then lastly, the opinions and recommendations expressed by the experts leading and participating in this discussion are solely their own and not necessarily those of Conversations on Retail. We just ask that everyone consider the suitability of everything for their own circumstances. So with that said, we're so glad you're here. Let's get started.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining me live from Austin, Texas, broadcasting the second in my series of conversations with incredible people from the United States and around the world. I'm so thrilled to welcome Mark Baum today. As Matt said, COO of FMI, the Food Marketing Institute. And really, this conversation, like all people, planet, profit conversations, is dedicated to my premise, that all companies today can be triple bottom line, can balance the emphasis and the good that we do for both people, for our planet, and for profit. And by that, I mean growing, thriving, scaling businesses that give back and create healthy, vibrant communities and take care of the planet. And I can think of no one better than my good friend, Mark Baum, today to come and join me in this conversation. So welcome, Mark, and thanks for taking some time out on this very hot summer day. So cheers to you up in DC.
Thanks, Suzy. Thank you so much for having me. It's my privilege and my pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. And I have to say before we get started, I love the whole concept of people, planet, and profit. Indeed, we can create a triple bottom line. And I frequently ask our members and other stakeholders this question. We're part of this great industry. Our tagline at FMI for years was feeding families and enriching lives. And it's not just a tagline or a motto, it's a way of life. And that's what we do for a living. We take care of our associates and we take care of our customers and we take care of our communities. But I'll start by sort of asking this question rhetorically because I think it'll manifest itself in several of the topics we'll touch on today. What is our responsibility as an industry to feed a more crowded, hotter planet with finite resources?
Yep. So it's a perfect question. And I know for all of us here in the U.S., I'm sure around the world, climate change is ever present on our minds. Just watching the news in the last few days coming out of Hawaii. And it's not just Hawaii. It's in where I live in Austin, Texas, where I don't think we've had a day below 105 in, 6 or 8 weeks. So, but don't let me digress. I know that you and I, Mark, we talk a lot. We have brilliant conversations, and I consider you a great friend, as I consider FMI one of my best resources and mentors through my stewardship of running companies here in the U.S. You know, I hearken back to when I first met Leslie. And she was lovely and invited me to join the board when I was CEO of Andronico's out in San Francisco. So we've had a mutual affiliation and affection, I think, for a number of years. So today, I've worked to try to corral us into 4 major topics. We're going to flow through. I'd love to hear your point of view on technology today. It's ever present on all of our minds, those of us running, leading startups or turning companies around. Second, we're going to talk about capital in our marketplace. The capital flows in and out. How do we operate today against the backdrop of all the M&A that's going on? But it's not just mergers and acquisitions, as we've been speaking about. Then we'll touch upon leadership today. I'd really love, you've probably got one of the coolest titles in business, Chief Collaboration Officer, and you do that so naturally. So I'd love to learn from you today some of your perspective on leadership traits and talents and some of the things you see top leaders doing well. And then lastly, on the people piece, we want to touch on the evolving state of the consumer because it's changing every day. One of the things I love about our business is you wake up today and everything is different than it was yesterday. So with that in mind, let's get right into it. And I'd love to have anyone watching live. Yeah, please send us some thoughts and questions in the chat room and we'll make sure that we leave some time to get to them. So let's hit the ground running. Technology, do you have a particular point of view? I'm sure your phones are ringing off the hook these days with, Mark, what do you think of this new AI I've heard about? What should how do I even begin to think about tech, modernizing my business with all of these technology solutions? Because increasingly today as grocers, we are inundated with solution providers reaching out. So do you have a general point of view for how executives should start thinking about dipping their toe in the water? Or do you have a point of view on some of the top 2 or 3 things you think are working well, tips for the trade, et cetera?
Sure. So, let's just put it into context. First of all, think about the role of technology in our own individual lives, within our companies, within societies, across countries. Technology is like the one constant that we all have to deal with. And if you think about technology, it allowed developing nations to leapfrog a couple of generations in things like telecommunications and other areas that technology has so greatly enabled. And so put it back into the industry. We have 6 imperative issues, Suzy, at FMI that were identified by our board, but there are really 5 with one great enabler. So the 5 are supply chain, labor, marketplace and society, ESG, and consumer. We're going to touch on several of those today, but right in the middle of all that is technology. Technology is the great enabler. And we often say, if you're not technology enabled in our industry today, you're competitively disadvantaged. So you have to be thinking about it. You have to be acting upon it. Another thing that we've been kind of carrying around as a mantra as of late is every CEO should think like a CIO.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, in our business, typically on the CPG side, CEOs have come up through brand management and marketing. On the retail side, through marketing and merchandising. Not very many CEOs have gone into that CEO role. So it's really important for that CEO to surround him or herself with really leading thinkers when it comes to information technology. And for the first time, we have to really get deep with technical architects and data scientists and a lot of job functions that didn't exist within our space not too long ago. So it's really important that you think through your IT strategy. And just in terms of functionality, capital investment, operating costs, maintenance, and what are you going to invest in going forward? We did some work last year, which identified that retailers spent about $13 billion on technology last year. That sounds like a lot until you put it into context. It's about less than 1.5% of revenue. Yeah. So there's a lot of white space out there. It's about double in CPG for a lot of reasons. But if you compare that to other industries, we're going to have to step up our game quite a bit, and we're going to have to be very selective about how we do it.
No, I think that's a great point. The dollar amount is significant, and yet as a percent of sales, as a percent of revenue, I can harken back to my pre-retail days when I was in the restaurant industry. We used to say that if we're not investing minimally 5% of revenue in marketing and advertising, then we are literally losing market share. And a similar corollary applies to grocery, because if we don't invest today, we'll have to triple that investment tomorrow just to catch back up and level the playing field. So do you have a sense, or what's the coaching that you might give if you've got someone, a company reaching out, and maybe some of the C-suite strategic thinkers whose job it is to provide a roadmap? Do you tell them, hey, well, make sure you've got e-commerce nailed before you think about logistics? What are some guidance and guidelines that you give some executives when they reach out?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And by the way, I love your comment about the 5%, because when we think about new products as a percentage of the overall portfolio from year to year, it's easy to raise that number. We have historically thought of technology as kind of keeping the lights on or keeping the trains running on time. Now you have to think about it end to end across enterprise. And unless you're really titans and you've got great access to a lower cost of capital, you have to be selective. So think about all of the opaque functions. So on the supply side, supply chain and the like, you should be investing in things like automation, robot, anything that increases efficiency or productivity or augments your labor force, because we still have labor challenges out there. And then what do you invest in from a consumer-facing standpoint? Well, e-com is the obvious one. We've been on that journey for about 7 or 8 years now. This industry was a little late to the party on e-com, but now that we're here, careful what you ask for. Buys our estimates about the size of the prize about 5 times in 3 years, and that was pre-pandemic. So in 2020, from that point until today, although you're starting to see a little bit of a leveling out, e-commerce traffic increased, in triple digits. And for some companies who are already, say north of 10% or 15% of sales, which in grocery is quite high. So I don't think you have a choice but to be invested in that. The good news is everyone from our largest members to our smallest one-store operator members virtually are invested in e-commerce and in that game now, unless you're in a very rural area where the economics simply just don't make sense. But it's also, it's refine, repeat, scale. So there's still a lot of learning going on. There are still a lot of challenges. There's a lot of investment in curbside and home delivery. That model hasn't completely sorted itself out, and particularly economically at this point in time. So there's a lot of room for growth there. But then, you asked about what should you be looking at? Well, at the end of the day, you're in business to satisfy the needs or meet or beat the expectations of your consumers. So I always think from the consumer back. So what are some of those consumer-facing technologies that are really game changers? You said, think about a couple, 3. Well, first of all, you mentioned generative AI. I mean, it's, since around December of last year, it seems like it's all anybody can talk about. I don't know that anybody's, unlocked the keys to the kingdom yet. I've been in a lot of board meetings and a lot of conferences where we talk about it as being, the most revolutionary thing since the Industrial Revolution, right? Or the advent of the PC. Nobody, and particularly, let's make a distinction between generative AI and all the other functional applications, which we've been doing for some time now, right? We've been using a bit of it, and particularly in functional areas upstream. We're using it in things like hiring. It's really coming to life. It's getting smarter through the machine learning capability it possesses. But then when you start thinking about consumer facing, it both absolutely excites me and to a certain extent, it terrifies me. We have this incredibly powerful tool at our disposal. And frankly, most of the CEOs that I talk to are still trying to figure out what is the responsible and ethical use of generative AI from a consumer-facing standpoint. It has the potential for us to personalize, and we'll talk a little bit more about this when we get to, consumer preferences. But it also, there's a soft underbelly. I mean, we learned that with social, right? The good news about Gen AI is that conversation, everybody's part of that conversation, from consumers to companies to lawmakers and regulators and academics, as well as technologists. So the potential there is great. I think other in-store technologies, frictionless in-store experiences and checkout are really exciting, and it's making for a better shopping experience. Just the whole digital interactive experience that consumers are having, whether they're working through smart carts or robotics in store or just through their smartphones. I mean, pretty soon this thing's going to become your avatar. And that's really, really exciting to me.
Yeah, I think in many ways it already is. And everything you touched on about generative AI, yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I interviewed Emily Ma last month from Google, leading the Food for Good team, as well as a number of innovations. And I asked her point of view on generative AI, and her point was exactly the point you're making, which is really generative AI was initially conceptualized around a creative tool, and it works well, but it's still very nascent and very early days on how it can apply to business. But I love technology, and you and I nerd out on it all the time. I think especially during our conversations that we stood up during pandemic, when we were working to reimagine the new food economy and supply chains that work. But today I really think about it as it's technology is the layer that actually enables us to get the closest to our consumer, to our customers that we ever have before. One of the companies that I work with is SES Amagatag, SES Fusion out of Europe. But, with ESLs, with an electronic shelf label, we have dynamic pricing and promotion. So I can respond to the customer standing in front of me or to market forces. With computer vision on the shelf, we can see what our shelves look like in real time. So there's so much technology that enables us to digitize stores that, to me, is completely triple bottom line, because it makes the jobs of our teammates and associates in the stores easier, better, more efficient. It enables us to grade them on a meritocracy. It enables us to be efficient in our supply chain. Therefore, we're eliminating waste, so we have a less, smaller impact on our environment. And it allows us to grow incremental profitable sales. So whatever the solution, a holistic understanding, which I think starts with curiosity, right? I mean, that's kind of a leadership trait we can touch on, but got to be highly curious today and be innovative and not be afraid to kind of lean into some of these things that will, and my last sharing on this is, the way I think about artificial intelligence, AI, is the best use case is let the AI scale your HI, your human intelligence. Because you can have a couple of brilliant people at your corporate headquarters or regional headquarters or in the store. But with AI, we can scale that and we can teach and develop others and bring them on their own leadership journey. But I don't know what your thoughts at that.
Let's just build on. Can I build on that very quickly? The topics we want to cover, but you sparked a thought. One is you have to be curiosity driven, and that has led us into what I'm calling like the next great age of experimentation with technology. I mean, we're using stores as laboratories, distribution centers, manufacturing facilities. It's really exciting. It's dynamic, and one of the things you talk about when you talk about electronic shelf labels and the like, not everything works all the time. Do not be afraid to fail. I can remember when you were back in your practitioner days, not that long ago, you tried a couple of very innovative, bleeding edge in-store technologies. Some delivered exactly what you just articulated. Some did not. Don't be afraid to fail fast, move on. But be very thoughtful, because I think you can't do everything. So be selective. Understand what's most important to your business. Understand what's most important to your customers, and start there.
I had a conversation yesterday with a CEO, and he was asking about my view of modern retail just in a nutshell. And I said, well, I love brick and mortar. I love the experience. The brick and mortar experience is here to stay. I mean, grocery stores are not dead, and they engage all five senses. So if you want to win in brick and mortar stores, do a great job and engage all five senses. Be delightful. Be a delightful place to shop. It doesn't matter if you're value-oriented or if you're upscale-oriented. Make it delightful, make it enjoyable. But also realize that infrastructure you've built, that store, can serve as a dark store out the back for curbside picking, for delivery, for prepared food manufacturing, for a ghost kitchen, all of those things. And so technology is what enables us to do that. And I think technology has unleashed this period of creativity like no other tool has that's come before.
But it is an omni-channel experience. There's no doubt. We're big believers in brick and mortar, in experiential retailing. Food and related categories lend themselves to that perhaps more than any other. To your point, it's sensory, it's intimate, it's a metaphor for, your cultural identity or cultural differences. I say all the time, the most important tool that the State Department has in their quiver of diplomacy is dinner. I mean, really, when you think about this experience and what you can do in store, because you are using all five of your senses, as much as you can do online, you can't replicate all of that. And what I think retailers are finding is that their omni-channel customers are, in some respects, their best customers. A, what they're buying online is accretive, it's not cannibalistic. B, they're learning more about those customers in an effort to better customize that experience for them, which I know we'll talk about when we talk about consumers.
Yep. I'm just going to touch on last thing. This is what we do, you guys, when we talk. Yes, seamless shopping. I mean, I'm so proud of the time I got to spend with Kroger and helping build out a lot of our e-commerce footprint, but seamless shopping, because if I can be a hero to myself and to my family by shopping locally and or having my own grocery delivered or curbside, whatever's convenient. But I will forever love you if you enable me to help my loved ones, if I can send grocery delivery or send a treat or a bottle of wine to my mom who lives across the country, or to my dad or my family or that, then you are truly a part of my own family, my own community. And that's the goal of retailer today. Okay. We can nerd out more about technology, and you can come back to that. So flowing from technology, which does requires strategic thinking. Just don't jump for the first sexy Jetson-like robot you see. Be smart. Capital in our market. I wonder, I would imagine most of the folks on the call today understand the role that private equity might play in our business, and understand and are tracking how our industry is dynamic shape. There are many ways companies seek to grow market share. Some is through organic growth, and some is through mergers and acquisitions. We've talked a lot about Kroger and Albertsons, which I think is going to be brilliant for both the companies, for the associates. I think it's going to be brilliant for the United States. So coming back to the M&A and capital in our market, hyper relevant today, headline about Southeastern grocer selling off some of the banners to Aldi. But sir, maybe give me your macro level thoughts on how you see this shaping and influencing how leaders think today, and then any other salient points that you want to coach the industry on.
Sure. Well, first of all, to your point, there are a number of different, we'll call them ownership models today. We still have a great number of family-owned businesses in the marketplace with their names on the door. And some of the most successful retailers in the industry are those retailers. We have closely held companies. We have private equity-owned companies, and then we have a number of companies that are also publicly traded. And so each one of those models comes with a number of sort of, assets and liabilities, if you will. And access to and cost of capital is critically important given the investments that we're talking about needing to make on the part of companies. That said, it's led to a much more dynamic, competitive marketplace. The great beneficiaries, frankly, have been consumers, to your point earlier. Having a better experience, more variety, more competition leads to more options for consumers. M&A is just another perpetuity strategy. So, a lot of people have been talking about the Kroger Albertsons tie-up. Today, we saw all the Southeast grocers combination. It's going to continue, and I think it's healthy, particularly for those companies who are looking to perpetuate their existence and their competitive position in the marketplace in some way, shape, or form. And I think there's this perception that somehow it's at the expense of smaller grocers. And I don't necessarily think, in our industry, there's so many new entrants. The calculus for competition has changed so much that it's still relative, particularly to other industries, somewhat fragmented. And as you may have heard me say in the past, Suzy, there's always room in the winner's circle for successful independence. Size and scale do matter on certain attributes. There's no question about that. But when you get that size and scale, to a certain extent, that trade-off is for things like agility and flexibility and entrepreneurialism and being stitched into the fabric of your community. So figure out, what you're going to be good at, what you're going to be famous for. Use that to differentiate yourself vis-a-vis your competition, and you're going to be successful regardless.
100%. I mean, that's good wisdom for kind of any consumer-facing business. First and foremost, who are you? What do you stand for? Who do you want to serve? Answer those questions first, and then that helps you purposely design how you show up for your customer. And then everything else sort of falls in place there. So I couldn't agree more. And as you know, I've had opportunity to work for some of the leading companies in the world, whether it's here in the U.S. and the U.K. and in Australia 2 times. But I think I'm most passionate. I love working with regional specialty grocers, whether it's Andronico's or PCC Community Markets in Seattle. So there is room at the table. I think you and I just called you last week. I had been out and about here in Austin, and I went and visited 3 out of the 5 Foxtrot markets that just opened in the Austin market. Foxtrot being out of Chicago, and this really interesting sort of convenience store meets wine shop meets cafe. But they're meeting a need. They're meeting a niche that consumers are looking for, which is like another third place to meet up. But it's that between snack occasion and or, oh, I'm on the way to a dinner party and I need just to pick up a few things, or I'm on the way to the lake or whatever it may be. So thoughts on some of these small grocers that are coming into the market?
And I don't think they would have existed 10 years ago.
Oh, absolutely not.
And it's interesting, and he's doing a great job in a couple of major markets around the country. And if you look at the assortment, I'm a boomer. Okay, it's a little odd for me. Okay, but when you walk in, it's very experiential. You see a lot of really interesting products, and whether they're going to get repeat purchase or they're just trial doesn't matter. They're creating buzz, they're creating excitement, and particularly for that demographic, that's what it's all about. It's a lot of turn. It's almost like fast fashion in some ways.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think it's going to be really successful. I think it's very exciting, very dynamic. And again, I keep going back to the Suzy, for whatever reason, over the decades-long career that I've had, the graveyard is full of companies that were just following, the race to the bottom. Yeah. Really figure out who you're going to be, who your customer is. And I hate to call out individual companies, but I can think of several that are relatively small operators that just can't be beat. I was at a conference in Denver last week, and we had one of them on the program, and he was presenting what they're doing. And by the time he finished his presentation, I was starving. I mean, it was like I wanted to run out and shop one of those stores. And in fact, when we were at a conference in Chicago last month, and they were on the program with Fox, we went out and actually snuck out and visited one of their stores in Chicago. So, I mean, it's exciting.
It is exciting. And just to circle back on, touch a bit on the technology piece and sort of my perspective that today your brick and mortar's got to be brick and mortar out the front and e-commerce out the back. And what makes Foxtrot, in my mind, fit into a triple bottom line focused company. They are here in Austin, the 5 locations. They are all in dense urban areas. More than half of them really have no parking. I mean, I don't consider 10 or 12 parking spaces parking, because you've got your teammates that are going to use half of that, more than likely. But the way they built this is they have a massive online presence. So you can go to a Foxtrot. Yes, you could drive and find parking somewhere. Moreover, though, I see people walking in the neighborhood or people cycling. As you know, any excuse to get on my bike, I'm there. But they do a lot of delivery, tons and tons of delivery, and they purpose build and purpose design their box to accommodate that. So it's very smart. It's very efficient. It's using real estate that otherwise would probably not be used well, because it's in a spot, in a situation that's can't attract a big enough customer. So I've seen it very purposeful.
Same in DC. I mean, I think 3 or 4 locations as far west as Georgetown and into city center, and they've got one up right in downtown Bethesda. Same model, repeatable, scalable, going to be very successful.
Yeah, love it. Any final thoughts on capital inflows in the market? Anything else that you want to touch on before we move on?
Just think continued wave of competition and consolidation will continue. Be on the lookout for the next wave of disruptors that will create discontinuity, and figure out what your strategy is going to be competitive.
Love it. And by the way, Mark said he was a boomer, but he's not a doomer. So there's nobody younger every day and more positive than Mark.
Optimist, Suzy. Cynical optimist.
All right. So something that's sort of important in successful retail, leadership. Now, I know that's a very, very broad category. So specifically today, listen, as Chief Collaboration Officer, I think one of the gifts, well, you've created this, but the gift of your position is that you get to go have conversations with likely one of the probably the most diverse group across our industry. And you get to listen and learn and collaborate with top leaders, whether in retail or CPG or otherwise. So I'd love your thoughts today on, I mean, let's face it, I still feel so much that we're in post-pandemic. The world is irrevocably changed. I think, to quote you, there's ambiguity, there's volatility in the market. You could think about any part of leading people, running teams, communication, even things like, I mean, the obvious, how do we work together today? What does the hybrid workplace look like? I know the Zoom really got skewered a lot last week when they came out in the news and said, oh, by the way, we love Zoom, but we need our people back in the office 3 days a week. As you're out and about, Mark, and through your perspective and your multiple lenses, I love your thought on, how do you see top leaders reacting, responding, and thriving today, and any tips and coaching you might have for us?
Sure. Thank you for that. And by the way, it's a gift for me to be in this role, to be collaborating with C-suite executives and throughout the supply chain, right, from end to end. So I get the opportunity to see and hear and digest a lot of different perspectives. But the one constant is leadership's never been more important, because we are in an unprecedented time of uncertainty and volatility and ambiguity. And historically, there's nothing that we crave more as leaders in the business than stability and predictability and a very calm marketplace through which we could sell more goods and services. We've navigated incredibly through this. There's a couple of things that I take away from a leadership standpoint, particularly if you go back to COVID. I don't like to relive it because nobody wants to go back to 2020. But I think I've never been as proud and pleased to be a part of an industry that showed up the way that we did. We really took care of our customers and our communities and our associates. We provided what for a lot of people was like sort of the last vestige of normalcy in their lives. And there was no playbook. So leaders, CEOs really stepped up and improvised and made some really, really hard decisions and some really significant investments. And it demonstrated to us that we needed to be agile, we needed to be flexible. Then couple that with some of the supply chain challenges that we faced, into this year, frankly, although we're seeing a little bit of a recovery in 2023. How do we future-proof the system? How do we move from just in time, which served us so well for so long, until it didn't during the pandemic, into a just-in-case supply chain, but without breaking the bank in the process? And actually at FMI, we're doing a lot of that now, and we're getting great leadership out of the industry who are thinking differently. We've been, if you think about business processes in the CPG and retailing industry, they've been the same by and large for a long time. We've automated a lot of them, but now we have to rethink, reimagine them. I think the best CEOs are balancing their agendas with that and the here and now, and thinking further out and bringing those risk factors forward and imbuing all of that within their teams and giving their teams the opportunity to really think differently about the future. Because as I talk to CEOs, they worry about the half-life of their business 10 years from now and where they're going to be. And they've also lived for the first time in a lot of cases through an inflationary period. A lot of current CEOs weren't around during wage price controls and inflation back in the 70s. At the World Economic Forum a couple of years ago, it was the number one subject, and there were a lot of sort of deer in the headlights looks in the eyes of these CEOs. And we are now, Suzy, actually going through another inflection point in our industry. We have had at FMI over the last, let's just call it 12 months or so, a number of retirements on the part of our board members. That generation is now starting to retire and pass the reins to the next generation in a very, very different time. We talked about going from, what was normal to the new normal to the next normal. I'm totally convinced it's never normal. There's no one right answer to all this. You talked about collaboration. You talked about virtual versus physical. I think you have to understand your culture. I personally, given my title, I need to be out. I need to be with people. I need to collaborate. I think these tools have been great for us, but they don't take the place of face-to-face meetings. But when you think about the inextricable link between trading partners and the way, say, suppliers were calling on retailers and what happened during COVID, what is the future sales call? What does that look like? We need to be thinking about what is the future of both the workforce, and the workplace going forward. And I think CEOs who are balancing that current state and their workforce strategies with the time and money that they need to invest in the future are the ones who are thinking about it the right way.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's, I think it depends on the function within the company. And if we're talking about hybrid workplace, it depends on the function, and it depends on if what you're doing is consumer facing or not. And I think that's how you start to start to answer those questions for your company, for your work culture, I think, as you stated. I mean, as a grocer, as a retailer, we've got to be out and about. We've got to be in the stores. We've got to be supporting the teams that are actually working directly with customers. That's a very different type of function than someone who is particularly doing data analytics. That's a more of an individual contributor role. So I think it is a balance of all those things. The corporate culture, though, to knit all that together, I don't, not to put you on the spot, but do you have a perspective on the amount of time or the frequency with which, regardless of role, that you want to bring the team together just to maintain the culture, the vibrancy of that organization?
It's a great question. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer to that. And keep in mind, in our industry, we had frontline workers in stores, distribution centers, driving trucks over the road, and manufacturing facilities who were there throughout. Okay. And you have to balance that with, say, your office workers and others who were home in a lot of cases. And within, say, the retail community, we had some retailers who essentially never really closed. They cut down their sort of in-office percentage to, let's say, 20 to 25%, but they were open for business. We have other retailers who actually shuttered their headquarters, and they've got all their executives in the field and in stores. And if they need to meet, they meet in break rooms, and it's everywhere in between. I do think, to create continuity and a good culture, you should present FaceTime for your associates. I think we made great use of some of the virtual tools because now we're doing all hands in ways that we never could before. But, there's a difference between seeing somebody as a postage stamp size photo on a screen like we are today and being with them in the office. So I do think that companies need to really think about the function. I don't think you can just say on a blanket basis, everybody's in 3 days a week. Look at what's happening with investment bankers and with tech companies who have been trying this with, I would say, varying degrees of success, none of them largely successful to date. You can throw down the gauntlet and you can make it a mandate, and you'll probably lose a lot of talent in the process.
Yeah. It's thorny, and I think it's an individual. The health of an organization, I always liken to our own health, which is we're all bio-individual. And I think companies are bio-individual. You've got to respect that. To understand and grow the health of a company, you need to understand and have a stake in the ground on what the culture is and the purpose and the mission. It's not hard for me, though, to go from this whole topic of flexible workspace or hybrid, what that means today, to flashing to cities that I know we both love. Like, I've run a company based in San Francisco. I see what's happening in downtown San Francisco, and it breaks my heart. Same thing ran a company based in Seattle. So, I have a strong civic desire to see these cities and the downtown communities thrive, rebound and thrive. And yet I have to also acknowledge reality and respect that today. I think most of that culture has changed. I love Donnie Deutsch. I listen to his on-brand podcasts all the time. This morning I went for a walkabout. I was listening to Donnie Deutsch, and he was quoting, recent data that, according to executive survey, that everyone thinks Fridays in the office are dead forever, and Monday is probably headed the same way. So as I think about that, I juxtapose it with the health of some of our major cities, and then I spin myself in a bit of a circle. So I'm always looking for wisdom from you.
Both on a personal, so first of all, nobody's complaining about having more flexibility in their lives, including me.
Yeah.
And that is a good thing, and I think we should all really appreciate that. By the way, I love Donnie. I've known Donnie since he worked for his dad, David Deutsch, at David.
Really?
They were an ad agency in New York back in the early '80s, and that takes me to your other point, which is, as you know, I'm a true blue New Yorker to my core. I carry that provincial view of the world around with me wherever I go, and I love the city. And when you think about, tourism and entertainment and hospitality, it's the beating heart of New York City and other big cities, but it's particularly amplified in places like New York. And I watched for, a couple of years as all that sort of dissipated within the city that I love. And even today, if I look at sort of the commercial real estate sector in New York, and this has a lot to do with back to work and whether people are coming back in or not, I think we peaked early on in the summer at just under 50%. Now we're back down. So what is it going to look like going forward? And I think this is one of those things that is going to require a cross-functional effort between urban planners, real estate executives, travel, transportation, and hospitality executives, food industry executives, civic and other community organizations to really reimagine what the future of urban living is going to look like.
Couldn't agree more. I think that was the most recent article in the Wall Street Journal in San Francisco is sort of saying the same thing. They're now looking at, how quickly and how efficiently can we turn office space into living space, which would accomplish many, many great things for the folks that live there. Before we leave on leadership, I do want to ask you about any thoughts or perspective on diversity in our industry today. It's interesting. I had a conversation a few days ago with Gaurav Pant with Grocery Dopio. And I know you know him quite well. And we were talking about standing up some research on diversity in our industry, and diversity for all the obvious things that it means. It's gender, ethnicity. But also we were really diving into exploring this topic of a global diversity, meaning diverse sets of experience from around the world or multi-international as a way to curate talent within a company so that we're not just quite so homogeneous in our thinking. Any thoughts or any work, or I know FMI has distinct communities and how you're organized. So any perspective on tracking that, any off the cuff on how you would grade us today?
Well, yeah, I'd grade us as a C- at best, and I think I'm being diplomatic. But I, being the optimist that I am, I'm very bullish on the future. And there's a lot of ways in which you can lean into DEI. It's an incredibly important issue. It's an issue that I've been addressing, for decades now in the industry. And yet, we make progress in starts and fits. And I don't want to not acknowledge the progress that we've made. But I will tell you the road ahead of us is much further than the road behind us. And so long as we keep looking at these as initiatives and we got posters on the wall, we keep pointing to the posters on the wall. I keep saying to our members and others, you're successful when you can take the posters down. When it's in your DNA, it's how you wake up in the morning, and it's the lens through which you see the world, you lead your organizations, you attract and retain talent. And there's a lot of ways that we don't have time to get into a lot of it, Suzy. We're doing quite a bit in this area. We're partnering with the Center for Food Integrity. We've stood up a bunch of webinars on this topic. We meet with individual members. We have a supplier diversity community within FMI as well. But I think it's more than that. I think you have to look, if you're a retailer, you have to look, what am I doing at the store level? What am I doing at the distribution level? What am I doing at the C-suite level? And it's a lot easier to diversify in the C-suite because there's so fewer of them.
Yeah.
So you have to really look at this holistically. And at this point, you raise a really interesting attribute as well. The world is much smaller today. So diversity also means a diversity of cultures and backgrounds and experiences, because increasingly, that's what our communities look like as well. So what can we do? And this is particularly true, and I've seen some really good examples, particularly with multinational companies, who are saying all roads don't lead back to headquarters wherever that happens to be. In fact, we're going to take our folks here, we're going to put them over there so that they have that experience. I can remember 20 years or so ago, we take manufacturing executives and we put them into retail and vice versa, or take a manufacturing executive and have them serve with a food broker or vice versa, so that they benefit from the diversity of those experiences. I'd like to see us do more of that because it gives us a better understanding of one another and how to work better together as well.
No, I love that. And it's, when I was talking to Gaurav the other day, I said, listen, there's lots of reasons to be diverse, not just, and I hope you're not doing it just to tick a box. But if you're not diverse in your talent, then you can't appeal, attract, retain your customer base. Because today, we live in a TikTok world. And you need TikTok talent. By that, I mean someone anywhere around the world could right now could post something on TikTok. And in 15 seconds or 30 seconds after they posted it, it will virally spread around the world. and influence how someone is shopping or interacting with your business. It's instantaneous. So to think that our U.S. customer, I mean, it is multi-ethnic today. It's multi-generational today. It's multi-gender today. And if you're not curating talent that can play across each of those verticals, then you are just losing half the market share there. So it's not even smart business, let alone being good business.
I by the way, just as you mentioned, TikTok, for better or worse, if you go back to your opening question around technology and what I get excited and get nervous about, I put that right up there. You know, these enabled devices have they've changed the way we advertise. They changed the way people communicate, and they have accelerated exponentially the speed at which that information travels. And we can see great examples of that go viral, that are really happy. And we've seen examples within our industry that are tough. It's going to kind of lead us to this last topic, Suzy, around consumers, because consumers are increasingly interested in your position on things. How do you navigate a very, very polarized political environment and otherwise make sure you're doing the right thing?
No, 100%. And I think that's a good segue. There's a few questions in the chat, but I do want to just shout out my friend Lori Taylor with the Produce Moms just made a comment about diversity. And she says, I think the grocery industry has always done a great job of driving DEI. And I couldn't agree more. Lori and I met when I was running fresh food for Kroger, who, by the way, does a terrific job of putting their money where their mouth is. I mean, Kroger is not putting DEI posters in the back room to look good. They're actually leaning in, which I think has given them the talent pipeline that they need today. So getting to our fourth and final topic before we have a couple of minutes for questions, the state of the consumer. And I know this was near and dear to your heart, Mark, and you called it out to make sure that we specifically could address some of this. But there's a shift in consumer shopping and food values today. People have a variety of tastes and diets and lifestyle needs. How do you think we're doing as we respond to that?
I think we're learning. It's fascinating to me because for the longest time, the three primary attributes or drivers of the path of purchase were price, taste, convenience, not necessarily in that order, depending on the consumer. I always say it's taste first, but given the nature of what it is that we're in business to do. I would say, if the product doesn't taste any better than the box it comes in, you'll get trial, but you won't get repeat purchase. Now, those drivers are so critically important, but they're just table stakes. FMI does research every year. We do consumer trends, and we now track those over the course of the year. And it's been fascinating to see that shift over time. And that shift tends to be kind of picking up steam. So let me just say this. The traditional drivers, price, taste, convenience, are still there. But now you've got all of these emerging drivers, and to pre-qualify, Suzy, not necessarily targeted to any one particular consumer class or demographic or geography. This is really across all geographies, all ethnicities, all races, gender, plus 50% of all consumers in every one of those cohorts now would tick off the following as being really important to them. Health and well-being. What are you going to do to help me? You said it earlier, not just provide a seamless experience for me and my family, but to help me make better decisions for myself and my family in terms of our diets and the products that we choose to buy and consume. Food and product safety. It's kind of interesting. And it's not just, if I eat this, will I get sick? What are the implications of rubbing this into my child's skin for the next 5 years or feeding them these particular products? So that whole concept of food and product safety has taken on new meaning. Social impact. People care about your values as a company. I sometimes advise our members, your values as a company are becoming as important as the value of the products and services that you're providing. And what's your North Star relative to those issues? And going back to something I just said a couple of minutes ago, in today's world, your customers expect you to have an opinion on a number of these social issues. Yeah. But depending on where you're located, you have to be aware that up to and often more than 50% of your customers are probably going to disagree with whatever your position is on anything because it's a reflection of everything else that's going on in society.
Market just talked about in their earnings release, and look at AB InBev. Go ahead.
Exactly. Yeah. And by the way, as part of social, I kind of lump all these ESG issues together, but environment is really important, and energy. You opened with some comments about climate change. It's real, it's happening, it's accelerating, it's having a dramatic on everything from farm to fork and soil health and water and everything in between and consumers care. And even in the midst of this last, year or so where we've had stubborn inflation, there's at least a self-selecting set of consumers who will continue to pay more for those products that they believe are sustainably sourced, or it's sustainable packaging, or it's more circular in the way that it's brought to the marketplace. So those issues become really, really important. Carbon measurement, carbon output, all of that stuff is really important to consumers. Experience, and that goes beyond just product per se. It's what's that in-store brand engagement experience? How are they being met? And you kind of alluded to this earlier, where they want to be met, how they want to be met, with what they want to be met, etc. And you really better be transparent. And you have to be transparent, not just about what you're doing and how you're doing it or why you're doing it, but you have to be authentic about the way you're communicating it. Consumers can spot a phony a mile away. You and I have talked about this because we share a great love of the outdoors. So I would say, my poster child in this particular category is Patagonia, the company place. Well, the place too, but the company, they talk the talk, they walk the walk. Everybody knows what they've done with 1% for the planet. They put the entire company into a trust, and their consumers love them for it. They absolutely love them for it. And we have an opportunity in this industry because of the role that our members play within their consumers' lives to provide that level of transparency, to meet those, emerging consumer values and food values, and provide them with the kind of experiences that they're looking for.
I think you just described a triple bottom line company. I think you just described, and thank gosh for millennials, Gen Y, Gen Z for demand. I think I think they're demanding increasingly, thank goodness, that we balance all those things because why not? I mean, we do have an ever warming climate, and yet we still burn things every day. It's funny, I live in Texas, and I was on a walkabout this morning. I must have walked by 4 trucks that were just sitting in front of a house idling. Some folks were working indoors. I'm like, why are these trucks sitting there idling? People don't really understand that there's cause and effect. And it's not just that one little thing. There's a gazillion things that we do every day that aggregate to the warming of our planet. So anyway, I'm not going to get off on that vertical, but it's not that difficult to run a company and be ESG focused. It really is.
I think they're very compatible, frankly. And you see ebbs and flows, particularly in that space, because at least in the US, it's become somewhat politicized. Investors keep an eye on it because they want to keep an eye on the financial bottom line, as well as the other two that we were talking about. It varies by region of the world. Regulators and consumers are much further ahead in Western Europe than they are here. But if you're a multinational company, that's going to play out in a variety of different ways. We're looking to actually harmonize and standardize as much of that as we can so that we can do it in a cost-effective and efficient way. But I just want to go back to one point you made about, like, the younger generations are actually driving and leading this conversation. And thank God they are. So a lot of us are learning about what we should be doing around the dinner table with our kids, or on weekends with the kids and the grandkids. And as they come into the workplace, they're demanding it as part of the workforce. And so pretty soon, I don't think we're going to be talking about it in the same way. And I can't say whether it's going to be 3 years or 5 years or 10 years, but I would tell you it's one of our imperative issues now. 5 years ago, it would not have been on the agenda, and it's kind of moved from off stage to center stage. So I think it's not going to be that much longer where you just say, you know what, green supply chain practices are just good supply chain practices.
And it should be the default. Yeah, I'll underscore that, and then we can get to some questions. But yeah, as you know, I was able to spend a few weeks in Europe last month and a couple of weeks with my niece, Kate, who's 27 now. And she knows that everywhere we go, we stop in grocery stores and we walk stores together. And I think of myself as fairly progressive, but I came away really fascinated by her viewpoint on how she shops and what she looks for with all of those things in mind. And it's always quite helpful. Okay, we just have a few more minutes. We have a couple of questions. Let's see. Mark, I think this may have related back to something you touched on. John Eustace has said, given that I'm reading it, 161 billion in food waste in the States, where do you feel this comes into the triple bottom line agenda and debate? Oh, well, maybe that's just an open question. Food waste in general. Yes, Americans, consumers, we waste 30% of everything we buy, and that's after we bought it. That's not even upstream in the supply chain. Thoughts on food waste?
So if I had to say, what's the peg we're hanging our hat on probably most frequently is food waste. And by the way, the flip side of that, food insecurity.
Yes.
So, we still have an unacceptable amount of food waste. And frankly, during the, 2020, 2021, we had huge increases in food insecurity and huge decreases in food availability. Not for lack of food, but lack of ability to move it to point. Suzy, you and I have been involved in a number of initiatives looking to smooth that out and making sure we get product where it needs to be, when it needs to be, there for whom it needs to be served. We are doing a lot. There's a lot that, we've got on FMI.org and sort of what our members are doing. I do want to say the White House last September 28th, put up a conference on hunger, nutrition, and health. And in response to that, we hosted an event in Washington, D.C. a month later, October 28th, down on the Mall at the Smithsonian. And we've made a number of commitments as an industry with regard to the priorities that they spelled out within that conference. And, our commitment to deliver literally, hundreds of billions of meals, to take that kind of waste out of the system, to create more circularity in our packaging economy and the like. I don't think you can ever do enough. There's still an unacceptable amount of food waste. And also part of it is, not just from, say, supplier to retailer. As we know, much of the food waste happens in the home.
Oh,
there's a lot more we need to do to educate consumers about what they can do to reduce food waste, to recycle efficiently and the like. And of course, a lot of that happens away from home as well. And much of that is not recoverable, but we can actually repurpose a lot of unsaleable, but still usable product. And we should be doing more of that as well. Thank you for the question, John.
Yeah, I've started to have some conversations with Abhi Ramesh, the CEO of Misfits Market, and that's their mission. Second question to touch on, anonymous. Someone is asking, why do I feel the Kroger-Albertsons merger will be good? Is it not anti-competitive? Listen, it's a very long topic, but I'll just give my quick POV. I've spent years working with Kroger. I have firsthand experience in the massive investments that we make in our associates, whether it's education or otherwise, whether it's in professional living wages and all the work that we do there. I also love the brands. I love obviating and making brands like Simple Truth available to every household or the majority of households in the United States. I believe it's best for farmers because what farmers need is stability and forecasting so they can plan appropriately. So if I'm serving 100 grocery stores, that is much more stable and streamlined than if I'm serving 10. It provides me a one marketplace and an easier, more efficient way to plan and forecast and run my business. Lastly, anti-competitive. I don't see it that way. Today, 90% of Americans live within 10 minutes of a Walmart. Walmart is 3 times larger than this company is going to be. So I don't really buy into that. I really strongly encourage everyone to do their own research. Last thing, Bill has noted that we haven't touched on the impact of inflation in our current state and perspective on where we're headed economically as we state for both grocery and CPG. Are we delaying investments? So do we just have a couple more minutes, Mark? So your thoughts on managing during inflationary times?
I'll be really brief. I actually facilitated a panel discussion with a couple of economists and futurists last week in Denver on this very issue. The Cliff Notes version is this. Inflation is still hanging around, but it's coming down every month. We talked a year ago about the potential of a recession, but even then we were talking that it might be shallow and not long-lived. I think that if you go forward a year, is likely the case. And one of the pieces of advice, Suzy, that I give to attendees is don't necessarily plan your investment schedule, your spending, and all of the things that you were going to do with a recession in mind and one that may never take place. Consumers have proven to be more resilient than you think, and I can get into a lot around different cohorts within consumer groups like wage earners versus those on fixed income or those with student loans and those that don't, et cetera. But by and large, we've seen some down trading, but we've continued to see people are purchasing. Inflation away from home is a bit higher than it is at home. We see, and keep in mind, the media makes a lot of it. So we see when the price of eggs shoots to, $8 or $9 a dozen. We don't see anything when it comes down 2/3 of that amount and less time than it took to go up. So I'm, again, optimistic that consumers are seeing the light. And also we'll adjust our assortment to accommodate them. By the way, for retailers, it's an opportunity to really invest in own brands as a strategic asset during this time. So there's some silver linings in that cloud as well.
Couldn't have said it better. Mark, you are always an inspiration. Thank you so much for sharing your points of view and your perspective. It's invaluable as always. And for everybody, I hope this has been a terrific lunch and learn for you all. If you didn't get to catch all of it or want to watch again or share with your teammates, we will post this on YouTube in the next few days. Thank you all very much. Please join me in the next time for People, Planet, Profit, and Mark. You rock as always. Go climb a mountain.